You know Cleopatra. Her name has crossed centuries, languages, and empires. She is remembered as the last queen of Egypt, a ruler of intelligence, ambition, and political genius. A woman whose story has been told and retold, shaped by Rome, reshaped by legend. But Cleopatra was not alone. She had a sister, and history tried very hard to make sure you never heard her name. Tonight, we are uncovering the story of Arsinoe IV, a Ptolemaic princess, a co-ruler of Egypt, a military leader who once commanded forces against Julius Caesar himself, and a woman whose life ended in assassination, followed by silence. If Arsinoe IV feels unfamiliar, that is not an accident. Her story was erased deliberately. To understand why Arsinoe vanished, we must first understand the world into which she was born. Egypt in the 1st century BCE was not a peaceful kingdom. It was a pressure chamber. The Ptolemaic dynasty, founded after the death of Alexander the Great, ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years. Though Greek in origin, the Ptolemies presented themselves as pharaohs. They adopted Egyptian customs, gods, and royal imagery. But behind the public display of stability lay constant danger. Power within the Ptolemaic family was never secure. It was contested relentlessly. Brothers married sisters, sisters eliminated brothers. Children were removed if they threatened succession. In this dynasty, family loyalty was a liability. Survival required speed, strategy, and ruthlessness. Arsinoe IV was born into this reality. She was the younger sister of Cleopatra VII, the most famous member of the dynasty. Her father was Ptolemy XII, a ruler whose reign was marked by debt, Roman interference, and internal unrest. When Ptolemy XII died, Egypt did not pass smoothly to a single heir. Instead, Cleopatra was forced, by tradition and political necessity, to share the throne with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. This arrangement was common in the Ptolemaic system, and it almost always ended in conflict.
Cleopatra attempted to rule decisively. She spoke Egyptian, unlike many of her predecessors. She positioned herself as a legitimate pharaoh in the eyes of the people. But her brother's advisors feared her independence. Within a short time, Cleopatra was pushed out of Alexandria. Her name was removed from official documents. She fled Egypt to gather support. Civil war followed. It is here, in this chaos, that Arsinoe's story begins to surface. Unlike Cleopatra, Arsinoe was younger, less visible, less documented. But youth did not mean insignificance. As Egypt fractured, every surviving member of the royal family became a potential ruler or a weapon. And Arsinoe was watching. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt. Rome was the true power behind the throne now. Caesar did not come as a conqueror, but as an arbiter. He summoned Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII to present their claims. Cleopatra responded with strategy and spectacle. She famously secured Caesar's support. But not everyone accepted Rome's interference, and not everyone accepted Cleopatra's return. Arsinoe IV did something unexpected. She did not align herself with Cleopatra. She did not retreat into obscurity. Instead, she escaped from the palace and joined the Egyptian resistance against Caesar and Cleopatra. This was not symbolic defiance, it was political action. Within a short time, Arsinoe IV was proclaimed queen by the army. This was an extraordinary development. She was young, she had never ruled before, and yet Egyptian forces accepted her leadership. Ancient sources suggest she acted decisively. She replaced generals who failed, she issued commands. She stood at the center of strategy during what would become known as the Alexandrian War. For the first time, Arsinoe IV stepped fully into history. And for a brief moment, she stood against both Cleopatra and Rome. But power in the ancient world was unforgiving. Rome did not tolerate resistance, and Julius Caesar did not lose wars. The conflict was approaching its conclusion, and Arsinoe's rise was about to meet its fall.
The conflict that followed Julius Caesar's arrival in Egypt would come to be known as the Alexandrian War. It was not a grand battlefield campaign. It was a tense, chaotic struggle fought within the streets, harbors, and palaces of Alexandria itself. Rome stood on one side, Egyptian resistance on the other, and at the center of that resistance stood Arsinoe IV. After escaping the royal palace, Arsinoe aligned herself with the Egyptian forces loyal to Ptolemy XIII and hostile to Roman control. But she did not remain a background figure. Very quickly, Arsinoe moved into leadership. Ancient accounts describe her as assertive and decisive. When Egyptian generals failed, she replaced them. When strategies collapsed, she redirected them. This was not ceremonial authority, it was command. For a young princess to exercise military power in this way was extraordinary, even in the volatile Ptolemaic court. Arsinoe was no longer simply a royal name, she was a ruler in action. The Egyptian forces attempted to cut Caesar off from supplies. They targeted Roman ships in the harbor. They used the dense urban environment of Alexandria to their advantage. For a time, Caesar's position was precarious. He was outnumbered, trapped in a foreign city, dependent on reinforcements that had not yet arrived. Arsinoe's leadership mattered. She represented not only resistance to Cleopatra, but resistance to Rome itself. To many Egyptians, this was not just a civil war, it was a struggle for sovereignty. But Rome was relentless. Caesar eventually received reinforcements. The tide of the war shifted.
Street by street, the Egyptian resistance was pushed back. During the final stages of the conflict, disaster struck the Ptolemaic side. Ptolemy XIII, Arsinoe's brother and Cleopatra's rival, attempted to flee during a retreat. He drowned in the Nile. With his death, organized resistance collapsed, and Arsinoe IV was captured. Her defeat marked a turning point, not only for Egypt, but for her own fate. Unlike her brother, Arsinoe was not executed immediately. Caesar chose a different punishment, one designed to demonstrate Roman supremacy. Arsinoe was taken to Rome. She was brought thousands of miles from her homeland, across the Mediterranean, into the heart of the empire that had defeated her. There, she was forced to participate in Caesar's triumph. A Roman triumph was a public spectacle celebrating victory. Captured enemies were displayed before the crowds. They were trophies of conquest. Arsinoe was paraded through the streets in chains, a queen reduced to a symbol. The message was clear. Rome had defeated Egypt. Rome had defeated its royal blood. Yet something unexpected happened. The Roman people reacted with discomfort. Arsinoe was young, she was visibly royal, and she was clearly defeated. Instead of hatred, many spectators felt pity. Ancient writers suggest that public sympathy influenced Caesar's decision. He spared her life. But mercy did not mean freedom. Arsinoe was not allowed to return to Egypt. She was exiled, removed from the political center, stripped of power, isolated from her homeland. Caesar sent her to Ephesus, a city in Asia Minor. There she took refuge in the Temple of Artemis. The Temple of Artemis was one of the most sacred sites in the ancient world. It was a place of asylum. Even kings and generals respected its sanctity. To seek refuge there was to place oneself under divine protection. For the moment, Arsinoe was safe. She had lost her crown, she had lost her army, but she was alive, and she was still a Ptolemaic princess. Back in Egypt, Cleopatra had returned to the throne. She ruled alongside another brother, Ptolemy XIV, though real power rested firmly with her. Rome supported her. Caesar was her ally. But Cleopatra understood something clearly. As long as Arsinoe lived, her rule was not absolute. A rival did not need an army to be dangerous. A name could be enough. A memory could be enough. And somewhere far away, in sanctuary, Arsinoe IV remained a living reminder of an alternative queen. The war was over, but the threat had not disappeared. It had only changed form.
Exile is often imagined as an ending. For Arsinoe IV, it was not. It was a pause. In Ephesus, far from the Nile and the politics of Alexandria, Arsinoe lived within the boundaries of the Temple of Artemis. This was not an ordinary sanctuary. The temple was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Its authority extended beyond kingdoms. Even Roman generals hesitated to violate its protection. Within its walls, Arsinoe was untouchable. In theory. She no longer commanded armies, she no longer wore the crown, but she remained dangerous because she was still alive, and because she was still a Ptolemaic princess. In the ancient world, legitimacy mattered more than force. A single surviving rival could become the center of resistance. Arsinoe did not need to act. Others could act in her name. Cleopatra understood this better than anyone. She had clawed her way back to power through alliances, intelligence, and timing. She knew how fragile a throne could be. Cleopatra ruled Egypt, but she did not rule independently. Her authority depended on Rome. First, she relied on Julius Caesar. She bore him a son. She traveled to Rome. She secured her position. But Roman politics were unstable. And then Caesar was murdered. With Caesar's death in 44 BCE, the world shifted. Rome fractured into competing factions. Power reorganized itself violently. Cleopatra watched carefully. She needed a new protector. She found one in Mark Antony. Mark Antony was not merely a Roman general. He was a political force, charismatic, ambitious. When Cleopatra allied herself with him, it was not romance alone, it was strategy. Together they controlled vast territories in the eastern Mediterranean, and together they evaluated threats. Arsinoe IV was still alive, still sheltered, still remembered. That alone made her dangerous. There is no evidence that Arsinoe actively plotted against Cleopatra from exile, but active rebellion was not required. Symbols are powerful. Arsinoe had once been proclaimed queen by an Egyptian army. She had stood against Julius Caesar. She had survived. In a world of shifting alliances, that history mattered. Cleopatra could not afford alternatives. As Cleopatra's power grew, so did her resolve. She had already eliminated rivals before. This was not new. What made Arsinoe different was location. She was not in Egypt. She was not under Cleopatra's authority. She was under divine protection. The sanctuary of Artemis had long been respected, but Rome was changing, and Antony was willing to bend tradition. For Cleopatra, Arsinoe represented unfinished business, a reminder of instability, a shadow that refused to disappear. The decision was not impulsive, it was calculated. Cleopatra did not act immediately. She waited until her influence over Antony was secure. Only then did she move. In 41 BCE, Mark Antony gave the order. Arsinoe IV was to be executed. This act was unprecedented. No rival of royal blood had ever been killed inside a sacred sanctuary with Roman approval.
Arsinoe was dragged from the temple of Artemis. She was not given a trial. She was not allowed to return to Egypt. She was executed publicly, on sacred ground. This was not only a political killing, it was a message. Cleopatra would tolerate no rival. Rome would enforce her will. Divine protection no longer applied. With Arsinoe's death, Cleopatra removed the final legitimate challenger to her rule. But execution was only the first step. Memory had to be addressed, because a story remembered could still inspire. Arsinoe's name faded from official accounts. Her role in the Alexandrian War was minimized, her brief reign ignored. Cleopatra controlled Egypt's narrative. Rome controlled the world's historians. Together, they ensured silence. By the time Cleopatra herself fell, Arsinoe was already gone from public memory, not forgotten by accident, but erased with precision.
Arsinoe IV's death was swift, but its consequences were long-lasting. With her execution, the last living rival of Cleopatra's bloodline was gone. No sister remained who could claim the throne. No alternative queen existed to gather resistance. For Cleopatra, the danger had ended. But for history, something else began. Silence. The execution of Arsinoe was extraordinary not only because of who she was, but where she died. The Temple of Artemis was one of the most sacred places in the ancient world. It was meant to be inviolable, a space where political power stopped at the threshold. By ordering Arsinoe's death there, Mark Antony shattered a long-standing tradition, and by requesting it, Cleopatra demonstrated how far she was willing to go to secure her rule. This was not a moment of passion, it was strategy. After Arsinoe's death, there were no public memorials, no inscriptions, no official acknowledgments of her life or status. She disappeared from the story Egypt told about itself. This disappearance was deliberate. Cleopatra was not merely a ruler, she was a master of narrative. She understood that power was sustained not only by armies and alliances, but by memory. To rule securely, Cleopatra needed to be remembered as the sole legitimate queen of her generation. Arsinoe's existence contradicted that image, so her story was removed. Roman historians played their part as well. Rome had supported Cleopatra because she served Roman interests. She was useful. Arsinoe was not. She represented resistance. She had led Egyptian forces against Julius Caesar himself. From Rome's perspective, Arsinoe was a problem best forgotten. And so, Roman writers focused on Cleopatra, on her relationships, on her downfall. Arsinoe became a footnote when she appeared at all. What survives of Arsinoe IV today is fragmented, a handful of references in Roman texts, mentions that describe her as rebellious or dangerous, never as capable, never as legitimate. Archaeology offers little certainty. There is a tomb in Ephesus that some believe may belong to Arsinoe. Its occupant appears to have been a young woman of royal status, but there is no inscription, no definitive proof. Even her burial remains uncertain. This absence mirrors her historical treatment.
She exists in fragments, in gaps, in what was removed. Why was Arsinoe forgotten while Cleopatra endured? The answer lies in power. History favors those who win, those who survive long enough to shape the record. Cleopatra ruled for years after Arsinoe's death. She controlled Egypt's official story. She influenced Roman perception through alliances and presence. Arsinoe had no such opportunity. She ruled briefly. She lost. She died in exile. And without advocates, her memory faded. Yet, forgetting is never complete. Every so often, a name resurfaces. A historian notices an omission. An archaeologist questions a narrative. A fragment refuses to remain silent. Arsinoe IV returns through these moments. Not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. Her story matters because it challenges what we think we know. She was not a passive sister overshadowed by Cleopatra. She was a ruler, a commander, a legitimate queen in her own right. She reminds us that ancient history was not shaped by a single powerful figure, but by many, some remembered, many erased. And her erasure tells us as much as her actions. Arsinoe IV ruled Egypt briefly. She commanded armies against Rome. She survived capture, humiliation, and exile. And in the end, she was killed not for what she was doing, but for what she represented: an alternative. As this story comes to a close, imagine the temple steps in Ephesus at dusk. Stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air still. No monuments bearing her name. Only absence. Arsinoe IV does not rest in grand tombs. She does not appear in triumphant histories. She survives quietly. In questions. In fragments. In the spaces where history chose silence. She was not forgotten by chance. She was erased. And remembering her now restores something history tried to remove. Silent history continues.